Okay, welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first Q&A of the year. We are kicking off with once again with 99Co. So previously we had JiAqmW, who was alumni from Rocket, and then we also had Lindy, who was here for UI and UX. And today we are happy to host Co from 99Co. So Co is currently VP of Engineering in 99. 99, if you're not familiar with them, they are a real estate company. They do, like, you can list your property, you can shop for property, you can rent property from 99. And Co previously worked through the full spectrum of engineering work. He's done front end with JavaScript, he's done back end with Python, he did infra, DevOps, he has done cloud stuff, he's familiar with GCP. And before 99, Co graduated from SMU with a bachelor's from business admin. So today's Q&A will be a bit different. We'll start with Co sharing a bit about himself, what he does at 99, his software engineering journey, and then somewhere in the middle, we'll have a mock interview / tutorial where I think Jian, are you the one being tutored? Yes, Jian will,
they just did scissors, paper, stone.
Yeah. Jian will run through her first mock interview as she prepares for her job application journey. And then we'll wrap up again with more questions about interviewing in general or technical preparation. So without further ado, Co, please take it away.
Yeah, sure. Woo! Okay. Nice to meet you guys. So yeah, don't be strangers. Any things, if you have any question at any time, feel free to shout out. But just to give a quick brief on myself. So I've been working in 99 and in the software industry for around 8 years now. I started out, funny story, and a bit similar to you guys as well, like but there wasn't a lot of bootcamp last time. I started out in SMU actually, so I was a business and kind of like marketing and operation management student. And then I think after the first year, I just figured out that okay, like business is not really my stuff. So and there was some friend at the time was kind of like, oh, I have a like a kind of online shop business, and I want you to help me with some WordPress stuff. So that's how I get started in like all this programming and design. So I just pick up things along the way during my university. And before 99, I was for a short stint was at Tech in Asia. So I also do more on the product design for them. So when I joined 99, I actually joined as product design. But when the company only have like 4 people, essentially you wear many hats, right? So I start as kind of both product design and a front-end engineer. I did that for about like, I think 2 years. And then we have this like huge move from like monolith applications to microservice. So again, similar situations, not enough developers. So that's where I kind of parachute into just doing backend development as well. So working with kind of like just the logic layer, working with database, breaking out all the the app into the smaller service, right? And so part of the natural process is that I do that for like I think a year. At the same time, I was also like kind of like a you call it like a delivery managers. So essentially, you work with a product team, and from the tech side, you worry about how is the timeline for all the engineering resource, and are people on time. And then I did that as a backend engineer at the same time for about a year. And then when we moved to GCP later on, so initially we were just like kind of like in AWS, and everything is like running in a virtual machine. So kind of like your DigitalOcean's instance, if a lot of you guys might have been familiar with it. So we moved to the GCP, and we start to utilize a lot of this kind of Docker and Kubernetes technologies. So I also kind of spearhead that effort into setting up all the environment. And so since then, I kind of just anytime that there is the shortage, because I work across the stack, right? So I'll dabble into projects and kind of help out in multiple area, right? So I did that until like I think for about 4 years, and then I kind of become like a front end lead. So worry more about like the technical part of scaling our front end app. And then for about the last 2 years, I got promoted to I think VP of engineering, and then my scope of work changed completely. So one of the joke that he used to have, that he used to tell to people in 99, and why they always ask me, okay, why do you stay with 99 for so long? And kind of in retrospective, I change jobs in 99 every 1 or 2 years. So it's always feel like I learned a lot of things new there. So for example, right now as a VP of engineering, I spend only about maybe 10 to 20% of the time on anything that is hands-on, and then 30% of the time on like technical review, and then a lot of the remaining time is actually on a kind of like building an engineering organizations and doing things like, okay, like going to this kind of this talk, the sharing sessions with external parties, focus on hiring strategy, where to target, focus on say the onboarding process, the training process that we have. Yeah, so it's a lot more outside of the tech cycle, which I feel like last time my work in SMU kind of come back and have me, because it's like you are in these junctions of business, product, and technologies. So you have like a much broader view of how things work. And yeah, so that's kind of been my journey so far, I guess. And if you guys have any questions, like I say, relating to any part, product design, front end, back end, the only thing maybe I haven't worked before is like native mobile, right? So yeah, feel free to ask me any questions.
Okay, thanks for that sharing, Ko. It's quite interesting that you graduated, from SMU with a business administration bachelor's, but then you did this huge merry-go-round and you came back, and what you're saying right now, most of your work is related back to analyzing how the business should work, how
Yeah.
but as part of your journey, it sounded like you had to learn a lot of different things, right? GCP, cloud stuff, front end stuff, back end stuff.
Yep.
How was it challenging to learn all this different? Perhaps you weren't really in SMU may not have prepared you for learning all this tech stacks. Was that challenging? How did you approach your learning? Did you feel that you were out of your league, competing with people who
Yes, I think even till nowadays, sometimes I still feel like if you put me to another people, maybe engineers that have worked for like 8, 9 years, sometimes I still have this thinking that, okay, maybe I'm not as technically strong as them. From like, let's say, the fundamental point of view, looking at things like algorithms or just the basics of computer science, right? So yeah, I always have this feeling, but you just have to roll with it, I guess. You learn as you do things, and almost most of my learning has been driven by some sort of problem that I need to solve. And then I would try to supplement whenever I can for when I encounter something that. So one thing about me is that I generally is naturally very curious. So usually when I find something that's interesting, I'll go through this very deep rabbit hole. So for example, last night I just stay awake for like until like 3 a.m. and reading about this entire proof of work versus proof of stake in the blockchain technologies. Right. So it's a bit similar to how I go through things in the past as well. I'm given a task, and you just have like, okay, you just have to figure it out, right? Because the things with early stage startup as well, and one of the lucky things is like now 99 is like already out of this stage, which is like early stage of like, especially if you have less than 2 years, what you constantly have to worry about the runway, like whether you're gonna survive the next month. Right. So when you build something, when the business side decided to build something, it's almost like a bet at that time that, hey, this is going to stretch our runway for a few months. Right. So I always get into this mode of, okay, how do I get things out of the door as fast as possible? But at the same time, we need to make sure that things can still be reused and scale up later. Right. So yeah, it's almost like, okay, you got a task. You go and read up about how to do things. Like Dr. Google is your best friend, right? And then over the year, what I found helped me is that I built this kind of like mental model or mind map of how the entire stack works, and only web stack. So that's so far as my experience, right, from end to end. And then when you build this mental image, the best thing you can do is find someone who are like maybe a colleague, a friend, who are like super strong in computer science and properly trained. Like, so I had this CTO who I've worked with for 6 years, and he essentially almost did a PhD in programming language in NUS until he kind of like, this way is too much of my time, so I'm just kind of quit, right? But he's super strong in technical. So when I work with him, I always ask him, so, okay, this is my mental model of the entire space. Where do you think that I'm missing, right? So then he would point out, okay, this is the space that you should supplement the learning, right? So that's how I get started, I guess. So it's kind of, I would say it's like a middle out approach, because it's like I start at the middle, not really like at the basic very bottom, and also very end level, right? So I start at the middle and I go both ways. Yeah.
I think that feeling of being, that imposter syndrome, not knowing, the fundamentals, is something that a lot of bootcamp students can relate with. So, do you think like finding a mentor like your CTO or someone like that who can, cover your blind spots, tell you where you need? Do you think that was integral and you?
Yeah, that is probably, I think, still. He's a very close friend of mine till now today, so I still think that's one of the. I think this is one of the best relationships I have had. So yeah, and it's definitely easier because unlike when you go to the thing with like nowadays, there's a lot of knowledge that you can find online, right? But there's no one to tell you what to prioritize, right? So having a person to bounce with, it's a lot easier, right? And very quickly he can help you spot check like the spot in your knowledge, right? So definitely trying to, this figure can come from anywhere, right? I think if you join the company, generally you were able to find maybe there's a few technical leaders that they also come from the more traditional background, right? And then and usually they'll have a lot of one-on-one. So this is something that I also encourage, especially the non-technical, non-traditional pathway colleagues to explore, right? Like when you have your one-on-one with this guy, because he's from the CS background, you can try to kind of help him map out what's your sphere of knowledge. Yeah.
Past speakers have spoken about the trade-offs in joining startups versus in larger, more established companies. That one of the possible cons of joining a startup is that you may not have access to mentors like these really esteemed, really experienced mentors. So what advice do you have for bootcamp graduates who are interested in being cowboys in startups to look for and connect with?
I think every generations, every period of technology has a underground community. So I think when I started out, it used to be Reddit. And then Reddit is where the early stage of Reddit, not the current state of Reddit, is where you can go through all the subreddit, and people are really smart. So that's where you can also have discussion with them. Now the platform is my go-to platform nowadays is Discord. So, but the Discord has a problem of distributions because it's not easy for you to find what Discord that has a group of interesting people, right? Sometimes you just have to trace down the rabbit hole, like I used to say. So one thing that I do quite frequent in order to find this is whenever I encounter something when I do my research online, like for example, I would listen to a podcast, and the podcast usually have a very long list of reference material. You go and trace down that reference material. You go and trace down, okay, this speaker, what's his background? And then you go through his Twitter and you find out, okay, he's usually, you just skim like the most popular tweet that he has, like maybe 10 or 20 tweets. And sometimes he'll have a link, okay, this is my community, right? So that's how you get into this area. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks that's a pretty detailed answer. So Discord, not Reddit, not the new Reddit anyway. So I want to ask you about your learning, how you approach your learning. So you said that, being in a startup, having to worry about runways and all that, a lot of your learning is driven by how do I add value? How do I, how do I extend a runway? But some of your learning is also has to be driven by curiosity, right? Like proof of stake work probably has little to no relation to what.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the balance here? And how much of your learning would you say is driven by the environment that you're in? And because 99Co has this current problem to solve, therefore, hey, go and learn GCP, go and learn Kubernetes, go and learn this. And how much of it is all like, hey, I'm really curious about this one specific thing, I'm just going to deep dive into it. So how do you balance, how do you balance this? How do you approach your learning?
To be honest, I don't think there's a balance for me. When I go down the rabbit hole, I really just go down the rabbit hole, and it can become a bit unhealthy sometimes. That's like you trade off your sleep essentially, right? So one thing that I seen useful for me, and sometimes there's a lot of things that you can do to learn, but retaining of knowledge is the hard part. Like you can read a few articles about this topic, but unless you have practice, right, you have the real experience working with it, it's hard for you to retain the knowledge. So part of it, when I am at 99 and I was thrown into all these projects, is they have given me the practice part, right? But for example, when it touched topics that's out of work and things that you don't usually have, things like, okay, now a lot of people do ML, machine learning, right? Artificial intelligence. All of this, you don't really have a good data set to really test your skill on, right? So how do you go about retaining the knowledge for this? There's one thing that I used to do, and I still doing from time to time. It's come from Richard Feynman. So Richard Feynman is like a physicist, Nobel physicist, right? Very famous. Particularly more famous on his learning technology and his ability to teach, right?
Yeah.
So he has this technique of actually, when you learn the topics, you get a piece of paper out, preferably a big piece of paper like an A3 or like an A2, right? And then you start to imagine that you have 5 years old kids. And then you must try to explain what you have learned to a 5 years old kids. And then you write everything down, right? So you can do it once, and then the next day when you go back at it, or the next few days, you go back at it, you look at it, and you see there's this vocabulary really is easy to understand for a 5 years old, right? Because it forces you to throw away all the lingos. It's one thing with technical learning is that you encounter a lot of lingos, right? A lot of terms. But knowing a lingo is not knowing the nature of something. So for example, like one thing that Feynman usually says is that there is no use in learning the name of a bird in different language. Right? The bird is not represented by the name. Right? The bird is a creature with wings and they can fly, right? And with a beak, right? So it's almost very similar way in the way that you learn technologies. Like you need to be able to break things down away from just name into how actually things work and things connect with each other, right? So by doing this kind of explain, like I'm fine, kind of exercise, you would start to do things like coming up with analogies, which help bridge you to the previous set of knowledge that you already have, right? Or start to connect things to the physical world, which again, kind of, for me particular, my mind work better when I have a real world analogies, right? So if sometimes I do things like I put things down in like Lego and I imagine how if they are technology and they move together, how they connect to each other, right? So that's for me is one way that I learn like the non-work things that you don't have a lot of time to practice on.
Okay, great. Breaking things down to first principles and explaining things to 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
Make more 5-year-old friends. Suping has a question on learning. Suping?
Yeah, sorry?
No, Suping has a question about your additional learning. Suping, do you want to elaborate?
Yes. I was just curious about all the learning that you're doing, especially as you move through the different roles. You do most of the learning, like, does most of the learning happen during work hours, or do you actually do it mostly outside of work? And if it's outside of work, like, how much time is it? Are you constantly, like in the past 8 years, always just outside of work, also like reading and doing all these things? How do you balance that as well?
Okay, I'll give you a different stage of my journey. So generally at work, so for the first 2-3 years of 99, my normal schedule is to go to company around 10 a.m. Went back at the last train, essentially. So it's like 11 plus, right? When I reach home, I'll stay awake until around 3. And like when I reach home, it's like 12 to 3. So you do shower, right? And then the rest of the time is just digging around, related to concept that that's you currently tackling, right? I think I spend. That's why I say it's an unhealthy amount, because it's like you're really trading off on sleep. But when things start to kind of settle down, and it's a very unique situation because you have to remember that it's the first 3 years of a startup, right? And if you join a mid-stage startup, or if you join a bigger company, you might have more time because you end your work at like say 6 to 7, right? You get home, finish your lunch, then finish your dinner, then you already have like maybe 9 p.m. So my current schedule is a bit more like I try to take 1 hour every day to do some reading, so to do some researching. I think it's a lot more balanced, partly because I'm above 30s now, so the energy's reserve is not that high as before. So yeah, I'll naturally get a bit more tired. But yeah, I try to get like 1 hour in at least, and it compounds things. And then make use of like the time that is usually it's like that time. For example, when you so I live in quite far from work. I live like I think a 45-minute 1 hour train from work. So every day last time I used to waste like 2 hours on train, right? And then use that 2 hours to something, right? So either you read the books or you have projects that you're working on. Just do it on the train. Yeah. So yeah. So there's for me. I don't think there's much shortcut. Yeah. It's really you just put the hour in.
Okay.
Does that answer your
Yeah.
Does it answer your questions, Suping?
Yeah.
I want to ask a follow-up, quick one.
Yeah.
When you do this deep dives into stuff you're curious on, proof of stake, proof of work, or stuff that may not be related to exactly what you're doing in your job, have you ever experienced that benefiting what you're doing in your job, building a bridge, or like?
Yes, definitely. So I use the example again. So like for example, proof of work, proof of stake. A lot of that is just a distributed computer system, right? And you definitely see so what you will see is like it help you see that actually like in the whole computer science is about computer working with each other, and it's a different way of computer working with each other. So you bring back a lot of this knowledge when you have to deal with, okay, so from my case now, it's like production issues, scaling issues. How do you scale things, right? So when I study, especially by the consensus mechanism of the proof of work, right? Something that you learn about it is like there's a trade-off between your block size. Like the block size has to be very small, but in order to broadcast to a lot of people and to have a lot of node possible able to run it. So it linked back to one of these very classic concept in computer theory, which is space-time trade-off, right? So then whenever you go back to work, it's reinforced this space-time trade-off. And then whenever you go through a requirement, you know that, okay, if the product size requirement is for these things to have under 300 ms performance on an endpoint in less for the 90th percentile, right? That means they are trying to push for time, which means your solution has to incorporate some sort of space. Right? It has to grow in space. There is no other way, right? So that's how you look at things that improve, like using space to attribute to time. For example, caching, right? So a lot of the things that we are doing day to day as well. Yeah.
This sounds a lot like what you mentioned earlier about having this mind maps, this mental model.
Exactly.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
So Brian specifically has a question on mental models. Brian?
Yeah, hi. So earlier you talked about mental models and the building of that, right? So is it like for you, is it like something that you do within internally through your experiences and then you go through reflection, self-reflection, and thought experiments, or do you actually map it out of some kind of technique with and like I guess that like more specifically, you mentioned earlier that the most difficult thing in learning was retention. So how do you retain knowledge? And is it just through those practices and experiments that you do? Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good question. So there's a few components, so I'll break it down first. First part component is on, I think, how do I, there is when you do this kind of deep dive learning, and you want to, for example, retain the knowledge, and how I do it, either inside my head only, or is it on paper or other medium, right? For me personally, it's a combinations. But I will not do paper every day lah, because it will take a lot of time as well. But you use it as a review channel. So maybe once every 2 weeks, one every month, and you kind of try to do this whole mind mapping exercise, and you try to draw out, okay, what's the different kind of bubble of computer science, and where you're lacking off, right? But usually I do it a lot more frequent in my own head. And it's usually when I read something new, then I'll try to bring it in. And I try to have some sort of a library in my head to see where it fits into that library. Okay, this is something that is maybe a bit hard to think of, but one of these memory technique is, so memory abstract is hard to remember, but if you connect it to a physical place, it is easier. So what I do in my head is I have a memory model of my childhood house, right? It's like you live there for so long, and then whenever I try to do something relating to knowledge and acquiring a new knowledge, right, I'll try to so this knowledge, I'll put it in this room in my house, in my imaginary house, right? So like I know that, okay, this bucket is here. The next time I go to this room in my house, and I try to get that, right? So it helps with kind of like, over time your brain just build up these weird connections of, okay, this knowledge is in this room, and it become oh yeah, I think it's called memory palace. Yeah, it's this. Yeah, but you use a place that's familiar to you, right? So that's one. And then the other things that I do, again, related to retention as well. I try to speak out a lot, and I try to sometimes imagine that, okay, if I have to go to a technical talk and I have to give a talk about this topic, what would I say? What would be my topics? What would be the thing that I know that is useful to other people, right? And now usually I do it when I walk my dog. So, so sometimes people think it's a bit crazy, because like I walk my dog and I would be mumbling something. But it's yeah. So there's 3 channels that you can see. There's a visual by writing things down. There's a verbal repeating of this, right? And then there's introspections of going it through your mind. Yeah.
Great answer. Cool. I've heard of the term memory palace, but I've never met anyone using it. But I saw it in BBC's Sherlock, I think, season 3. I thought it was
nice. No, I'm definitely not to that level of like, you know,
I don't
when
think
you take
anybody
the book out. Yeah. I just use it memory as a like, okay, this room is associated with this group of knowledge. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I talk to myself also, so it's good to know that I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 more questions before we jump to Tian Gary. Hertanto has a question about the transition from technical and non-technical. Rather for you, it's more of like non-technical to technical and then back. And Hertanto, do you want to explain what you're asking for? Hertanto, you're here, right?
Yeah. No, I was just wondering because sometimes like in the workplace you are you move from technical and technical the other way around, and sometimes it's by your choice. Sometimes like you're pressured by the upper management to actually do that. And I was just wondering, because I think those roles are very different. It's almost kind of like a career switch almost. And I just want to know what you think about it, like and how do you decide those kind of transitions?
I have a belief, and it used to be something that one of the early CTO kind of criticized me for. So I have a belief that I should build myself in a T-shaped patterns. So some T-shaped patterns mean that like you build up the stroke of the T, right? There'll be a stroke down and then there's a stroke horizontal, right? So you should have one area that you are quite strong at, but if you over invest in that area, there is diminishing return. Because it's almost you are like getting into researching area already, and sometimes researching there's a lot of error or false before you can hit something that's true, right? So once you build up the downstroke already, you can focus on building up the horizontal stroke. And how it helped me is, I think it helped me to see things in a lot of lens. So I always have this indication, like this preference of, okay, like you will, I have this preference of actually, I prefer to also once in a while switch the environment completely and see from the other angles. So luckily in 99, I don't think it's not, no managers usually kind of force me to do it, right? The convention is more like, okay, we have this problem, we don't have anyone that is able to handle it right now. Do you want to do it or not, right? So it's a lot more natural rather than, okay, like okay, you today I transition you to like a different engineer altogether, right? So yeah, I guess that's my thought on it. I'll still thinking that I'll try to explore a new field maybe every other few years. I think a good time frame is like you stay in one area for like 2+ years technically, right? Because first 6 months is always building up the knowledge, the domain knowledge, the base level knowledge, and then that 1.5 to 2.5 years later is where you kind of hone your skill, right? Hone your craft, and then after that is where I tend to transition. Yeah.
You said your CTO criticized you for it. Did he criticize you in the sense that, did he think you shouldn't be T-shaped, or was he criticizing you?
Yeah, sure. So he was more on, you should just focus in one area. Yeah, you shouldn't try to, because when I was in 99 early on, I really like, okay, because when the team is small, you talk to everyone, right? And you talk to everyone and you kind of like see what they do, and then you kind of become interested as well. So sometimes when you talk with your CTO, you'll be like, hey, like they're doing this kind of thing, they have this problem, how about we try this, right? And initially it was like, but sometimes I can understand from that view, because sometimes you give a suggestion, but actually when you interact with your colleague, you don't see the full picture also, right? You don't see like the surface of it. So you don't know what all the consideration that does not go into the final implementations, right? So maybe the CTO was coming from that angle of like, okay, maybe you should do a bit more research, right? But the CTO initially was also like, yeah, you should try to be specialized. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Does the CTO imagine managers to only be people who specialize in managing, people who have MBAs and do nothing?
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it's easier from management point of view. Why? Because resource allocations. And this is to be very frank as well, because I am sometimes trying to do it now, and sometimes I try to switch my engineer around, even different team or different departments, to kind of like create this kind of learning path for them. But I have a lot of pushback from product managers, because they don't want to disrupt their normal working cadence, right? They have a team that is working well together. They have a team that jail for like 1 year, 2 years, and then you suddenly like break out the team member in the team, right? So yeah, in a way, from, let's say, if you optimize for efficiency, that is a bad technique, because you as a manager rather have specializations, and then they build up the knowledge, they build up the efficiency in the task, right? Yeah. So I can understand a bit from the management point of view why maybe they looking for specializations. Yeah.
But do you feel that also having that that experience on the ground, being a technical developer, helps you in your role as engineering?
Yeah, definitely, because you are, first of all, is still a developer, right? So you know, okay, what's the nature of the developer like, right? Like if developers do a task repeatedly, the same nature for 6 months, maybe can 1 year he will question himself, like, because a lot of for us the industry, the nature of it is there's a lot of self-learning, right? So when you're a self-learner, you're always motivated by knowledge to go and learn more, to go and find out more. So if the company does not create the environment, the employee will look for it in other place.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate with that. Okay, final question before we go to the the interview. So now as VP of engineering, I'm assuming you also conduct the interviews for hiring people, stuff like that. So Shannon has a question on how you suss people out, right? So what are some characteristics you feel make a good team member employee? And then my follow-up question would be, coming from technical point of view, how did you learn? How did you learn how to interviewing skills? How did you learn how to, categorize people? How did you learn? What were the challenges you faced in picking up this?
Yeah, the first question I think is better to demonstrate later.
Okay, sure.
Where we do the interview. I'll show you a few techniques of how certain interviewer used to kind of fish out, right? On the second questions, there's I think is part of it is trial and error. Part of it is part of it is from general, I think, management book. There's part of it is also from peer in the industry. So that's my three sources, right? When I started out, it used to be a combination of first and second, meaning there's a lot of trial and error and there's a lot of like kind of reading books. But you'll see that a lot of the books, right? Especially you read the books on technical management, there is not a lot of book nowadays. There's maybe 2-3 popular books that a lot of people will know of. So sometimes you have to be willing to kind of stretch and go out of just technical, right? So I read a lot of book on management, people management, from a sport perspective. So like Bill Walsh is one of the coach for I think the San Francisco 69 is a football team in America, and he specialized in like a high performance team and in sport. And so you kind of read on different industry and see how things are done differently there. Then you read, I think, Alex Ferguson's, right, the leading book. And then sometimes I read on military book as well, like the SEAL team, people who run like the submarine, right? There's very, very interesting environment because it would highlight like, okay, there's very extreme environment. There's environment whereby you can see the performance week in, week out. But this book, there's one thing is that you cannot apply blindly because, like I say, like all different environment, right? Engineering, there's another different environment. So sometimes it's experience as well to know what to apply and what not to apply. That's why recently I've been doing a lot more of peers learning. So I encourage anyone who look at, say, wanting to become technical managers. There's this podcast that's called Level Up Engineering. That's quite good. So that's something that I tend to listen to as well. They cover, and this is something that there's a clear path for now. A lot of people to go from junior to a senior developer, but after senior developer, it's very blur. Like it depends on the company, right? You don't have this picture of okay, what else up there, right? So this podcast is one that is very interesting because again, it interleaves a lot of people who are engineering managers, technical leaders. So it gives you a foray into like what is the day-to-day, and is it something that you like, right? And then there's a second book is Staff Engineers. It talk about individual contributor post senior engineering, right? So these are the few kind of channel I look at to learn about interviewing as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. One final question, hopefully to set the stage and maybe manage expectations for Tian later. As someone who isn't formally trained in CS, but now has to deal with problems of scale and decentralized computers, how important, which side of the debate are you on when it comes to data structures and algorithms in interviews? How important is it to know, your linked list reversals, your FizzBuzz for interviews?
I would say in the context of interview, no. So I will not, in NI practice, you will not test for this. Because I think these are knowledge you can research on the jobs. So, and a few part, I think distributing computer is also used to the practice of, okay, like when you run an application in productions, think about redundancy, right? So what is in place for your redundancy? Is it like, do you have run it many instances? how do you load balancing between them? And then there is practice around monitoring. There's practice around analyzing log, right? But because you have too many different instances, how do you centralize the monitoring and the logging part? So a lot of that, I think, is a different set of skill. It's more like analytical skill rather than the pure, okay, it's data structure, I think, is necessarily to know the basis. Like, okay, like set, list, dictionary, and use them, right? But a lot of more specialized data structure, which if you, let's say you go to interview for, let's say, Binance, right? They'll ask you. And the structure of interview is they will start out with a simple problem and then they ramp up the difficulty. It's almost like you're doing lead code from easy to hard, right? The hard lead code usually will ask you some data structure that maybe you haven't heard before. Macro tree, or maybe like binary tree, how to traverse these, which is using a little bit more complicated. So those, I think, are quite specialized in a few of the service. It's not all the service will use that, right? Like, for example, binary tree, it's good when, let's say, you try to do some things. Let's say autocomplete. Part of our autocomplete is built using a tree. So a very specialized service. Not all service like that. A lot of service are just CRUD service, right? So CRUD service, the skill is a lot more about how you organize your code, right? Like make sure like the dry principle, right? How you abstracting out such that each of them is a nice single separated unit, right? And that has a good contract between the interactions, so that one component down, there is something that can swap in. Yeah, like so it's a different set of skill, I would say. And that's why in 99 we phase out data structure or algorithm that, let's say, we don't use very regularly in work. We will not ask these questions. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Good news for anyone here who wants to apply for 99. Okay, that's it. Thanks for, of course, great to meet you. Thanks for joining.
Cool.
I'm sure we'll see 99 back.
Hey, well, only if we keep sending good people their way.
Thanks for joining. We'll see you again.